everybody, I'm Pastor AJ Houseman, and welcome to Shit They Don't Tell You on Sunday, a podcast to dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Welcome to episode 11. Today, our guest is Intern Pastor John Fry, who is the pastoral intern at Our Savior's Lutheran Church in Fort Collins, Colorado. And I still kind of smirk a little bit because I'm excited that you're there and doing those things. But I've known John Fry for a long time, so.
Long-time listener, first-time caller, so. Yeah.
Well, because we met in working at camp at Lutheran.
2010.
Yeah. Fun times. We're old now.
A decade ago.
Becoming professionals. Almost. I don't know about you, but I'll probably never hit a professional level.
No, not so much.
And so today we're going to talk about what'll be the Old Testament reading for Sunday, June 20th. For anybody planning on going to church that day, this is what you're going to hear. And it is Job 38. All right. I'm going to read it. What, you're going to say something?
Nope.
Okay. Job 38 verses 1 to 11. And this is the NRSV version. And for the record, guys, I did just look up the multiple versions, and I didn't think the Common English Bible was that much better this week. So I'm just sticking with the NRSV. So here we go. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all heavenly beings shouted for joy. Or who shut the seas with a door when it burst out from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment, and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed bounds for it, and set bars and doors, and said, thus far shall you come and no further, and here shall your proud waves be stopped.
Word of the Lord.
Yeah, thanks be to God. So, the book of Job is a tough one, I think. It's the first of the poetry readings, the Ketuvim in the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible is just, split up into 3 parts. And it's, yeah. So the book of Job takes on the question of theodicy, which is, why does God allow suffering? Or, why is there suffering in the world? And where is God when it happens? One of those big, big questions.
Why do bad things happen to good people?
Yeah, exactly.
Question that we hear.
Mm-hmm. That is a question. And so that's essentially the story of Job, right? Like, so he's a really good guy, like apparently like perfect integrity, like just the best of the best, God-fearing, good, ethical guy out there. And so like one day, Satan comes to God and is like, well, would he still be like that if you took everything away from him? Because, he had, wealth and lots of land and cattle and a big family. And so here's the super uncomfortable part. God's like, I don't know, go for it.
Let's find out.
It's like, do anything you want, just don't kill him. Which I'm like, what? Right? Like,
not really what you'd be expecting if you were sitting down to read this story.
Right. And like, I think I don't know. To me, it's one of those uncomfortable parts because, like, I think it's always uncomfortable when we get faced with the God that's like, yeah, sure, go ahead, and allows Satan to, kill all of his cattle, destroy his farmland, and all of his sons and daughters. Killed them.
He gets covered in boils too, doesn't he?
Oh yeah, that was when after he took everything away from him, he still praised God, and then so Satan goes back to God and was like, hey, well, he's still got his health, right? And so God lets Satan try again and gives him all these boils. And so he's just miserable. And then all of his friends come to talk to him and they're like, dude, come on. So finally, Job loses it, right? And so and then he finally goes off on God and is like, come on.
You just get chapters of Job just yelling at God.
Yeah. Real good material for there if you're angry at God and just need to yell some stuff at God out of the Bible. Good stuff. So he finally so this chapter 38 is now the beginning of God's speech, going back at Job. And God's like,
because, well, I was gonna say Job tries to put God on trial, and make God take account for all of these horrible things that have happened.
Yeah. Which I get it. I mean, I see Job's perspective, right? Seriously, come on. But of course that's not, God never falls into that trap, right?
Who would preside over a court case against God? It would have to be God, right? How would that
right?
That courtroom
and that's just not fair. Clearly the jury's going to be a little biased in that case. What would be the jury of your peers?
I don't have a good answer to that.
That's probably wise, because in our theology, there's only one God, right? So, which, I mean, technically from an Israelite perspective, they wouldn't have thought that. They would have acknowledged other gods existed, but this was their God, their one God that they followed.
Got Marduk sitting over there and
yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, they live in, they don't live in a vacuum, right? They know other, cultures have other gods. And I don't think that they were like, oh, those gods just aren't real. That wasn't how people thought back then. Like we do now, right? We would just say, oh, those aren't real. But instead they would have just been like, oh, well, we don't praise those gods. So that's actually, so here's a fun fact about, so for my ordination, my psalm reading was one of the ones that acknowledged all the other gods. And it says, God walks in to the divine assembly, and in midst of the gods, he renders judgment and judges all the other gods. Right. So, and that's just something that's important to me to kind of say hey, in all of the world of all the things that, we could do, choosing this God still makes some. Anyways, that's a sidetrack. God is on trial.
Yeah.
But God doesn't take it. Instead, God's like, who are you coming here like an idiot trying to tell me, where were you when I created the universe, right? You're such a minuscule, is basically God's like, oh, you're just such a minuscule part of this huge thing, right?
Yeah, there's this amazing creation, and I'm interested in all these creatures, the earth, the sea, the stars, and you're this tiny little person in the scope of it.
Well, so it puts in the perspective that the thing that I think Christians really suck at is that it's not all about us. And I think that's what God's coming to Job, listen, it's not all about you.
Yeah. We when we read the Bible, that's one of our problems, right? Is we want to put ourselves at the center of the story.
Yeah.
And this is one of those reality checks when God's like, no, maybe you're not the center of the story.
Yeah. And so that's, I think that's just so difficult. We spent all of, most of Christian teaching and conversations and thought is about throughout history, right, is about redemption and about salvation, specifically of humans and specifically individualistically, right? Like that's just how we think of it. A couple weeks ago in the podcast with Pastor Chris Schaefer, we talked about how in John 3:16, right, like God says, I'd send my only son into the world to save the world, and that it's that it's about the whole world, like it's not individualistically, like it is taking the whole world into account. And so sometimes, like, are we really messing it up by thinking it's all about us? This is where I go, I'll let you talk eventually, but this is where I always think, like, when it comes to like structural sins and things like that, that I don't think that God is so interested in what our individual day-to-day lives and decisions are, but it's more about the grand scheme of things. Like, how are you as a human population being bad or good, like together, collectively?
Right. Yeah. Like, I mean, individual actions are important to pay attention to, but at the same time, there's so many things that, like, it takes a whole community to come to terms with. Like when we talk about repentance and like looking at, we have to look at like the whole community and not just like our individual transgressions, or whatever word you want to use.
Well, because we just have that very like selfish way of looking at things. And that, again, that same thing that like Job suffers from is that like it's all about me, right? And like not only for like the bad things, but also then like the good things, right? Like we think, oh, I'm a good person, therefore I should be rewarded. And I don't think that that's how it works, right? Like in the grand scheme of things, that it is bigger than us. So but anyways, so along these same lines, so a few years ago, the Catholic theologian Elizabeth Johnson, who is a sister of the St. Joseph's, yes, and a professor at the Jesuit University, Fordham University in New York City. She's pretty badass. I was telling John is that she's like really the only Catholic theologian that I can get on board with their writings. But so her book, which is called Ask the Beasts, the name itself comes from the book of Job, and she really uses the book of Job to hopefully change our mindset in this way that we think of ourselves, like the anthropocentric, means human-centered way of looking at the world, that we need to just like, we need to get past that like if we can get over ourselves and think that we're not the center of the universe, maybe that's an opportunity for how the world could change. But so her book and title is from chapter 12 of Job. But now ask the beast to teach you, and the birds of the air to tell you, or the reptiles on the earth to instruct you, and the fish of the sea to inform you. Which of all these does not know that the hand of God has done this?
It's a really like beautiful verse.
Yeah. But that idea that like, what if we took the needs and the opinions and the account of other created things besides just human into account, right? Like,
what if we thought of the whole world as the community that we are part of, and not just like our human community?
Yeah. So she came up with this idea in 2009 for the 150th anniversary of the publication of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species. For this, the dean of Fordham invited interested faculty to do a book study together. And as she was reading through the chapters of Darwin's On the Origin of Species with the other faculty, she started making a lot of theological questions. Like it drew up a lot of things for her that she's like, there are some things that I think as theologians need to rethink about. And she concluded that there was things that theologians had missed, and that it was time to start talking about them, to not just say, science doesn't matter in our theology, because it does. Like, science is just the way that we're understanding this created world, right? And so we need to start talking about it.
Well, and I think it's important too to note that like a lot of times when we think about Darwin, we think, oh, like religion wanted nothing to do with Darwin, or didn't want to like touch this theory of evolution, but like it was split, and there were scientists and religious scholars at the time that both agreed with Darwin and disagreed. Like it wasn't like all or nothing.
Yeah.
Whereas like it, at least in my upbringing, it was, I thought that like the church hated Darwin and hated evolution, and that isn't true and wasn't true.
I remember thinking that too, but I don't know where that came from, because I don't think I actually ever learned that from my church.
No, I don't think I did either.
Which is, I think, a problem that we get, I think, sometimes with sort of that, sometimes this mainstream mindset of what Christians think, right? Which isn't true. And I'm guessing that's what happened at the time, right? Like, there were a lot of theologians that were on board with Darwin, and they're like, thank you. This is explaining things that, that we believe to be true, right? And how is it that just sometimes the loudest voice is just that dissenting voice, right?
And they don't trust like the youth with understanding nuanced views on evolution, and so they just don't talk to your kids about it. They'll learn it somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, and so then that's it, right? So then at school, you're taught evolution, or at least you were in Iowa public schools. I realize that that's not true everywhere in the United States, that there are still some places that you're not allowed to teach that, which is kind of crazy to me in 2021. But anyways, and then in church, right, like we learn the creation stories in Genesis. And I shouldn't even say stories. I don't think anyone ever told me that there were two different creation stories in the book of Genesis. No. Growing up, right? Like, and so you had school explained it, and then church explained it, and no one ever took them and like was like, hey, these don't necessarily like have to disagree. I think the very first conversation that I remember having about that, and about how our story from the Bible can go along with evolution, I think was working at camp.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't really thought about it that way, of like where maybe I had those conversations, but camp is full of creation talk, so it was probably was. Yeah. But I don't think I can pinpoint it.
Well, it was specifically in the context of like someone was struggling with their faith because they, they were really into science and were probably going to become a doctor. And so they were struggling to kind of like reconcile their faith and what they learned at church with like what they, with science. And it was just one of those conversations where we both just kind of like really sat down and thought about it together, sort of like, why do these things have to contradict each other? Right? Like,
well, and Johnson makes the point in Ask the Beast that Darwin wasn't writing a new creation story. Like he wasn't like out to disprove any belief. He was just noting how interconnected all species were. And his main thing was just observing creation, and he was finding the beauty in creation and writing it down. And he, while doing that, found, oh, some of these things are related. Mm-hmm. There's deep meaning here. And I like, to me, that has nothing to do with like any of the creation stories that we learned, other than like there's beauty in the world.
Yeah.
And God can still create and is creating that beauty.
And it's so that interconnectedness, right? Like, so the whole point of what he learned is like how a species would start to evolve had to do with adapting to the environment around them, right? So like if the trees were super tall and they needed to eat leaves, right? Like, so the taller of whatever that species was going to thrive. And so then slowly the shorter ones would die out and the species would get taller. So things like that. And what his whole point with the interconnectedness is sort of like, well, it's because of our environmental factors. Like it's because of the other living organisms around us that have caused us to grow and to change as different
Yeah.
species. Which is a really cool thing to think about, sort of like what that means is like, to me, what it tells us is, you have some people that think that like, well, God created the world and then that was it, and then just left, right? And so to me, this is like, oh, this is just really showing us how God is continuing to create and to change and to be creative in the world.
Yeah. So where do we fit in?
We like to destroy things.
Yeah. Because if we do think about like the creation story, like Genesis 1, a lot of our human understanding that we've misused is from like that humans will have dominion over creation.
Yeah.
And like that's created some really harmful practices, where we like to destroy and kill.
Where the idea that this means, domination, right? And that like the humans were, everything is put here to serve us, right? And I think that that's been taken to an extreme. And just again, that's just that anthropocentric way of looking at the world. And in that way of looking at the world and having this domination is where we've gotten to a point of how much damage that humans have caused, that we thought that we had the right to take, to destroy, to cut down forests, to kill it. Like, right, it's like we had
Yeah.
the right to do these things and to make the earth the way that we want it to be.
We can better ourselves by destroying other habitats.
Yeah.
Uh,
And just like how much problems that this has caused. So Johnson
right.
actually takes it one step further too than most eco-centered people. So a lot of people, when they kind of reframe this dominion domination thing, is they say, well, when we've been given dominion, it meant that we were meant to be stewards and caretakers of the earth, right? That like that is our real job, that God gave us the job to be stewards and caretakers. That's what it meant to be in charge of this dominion. And Johnson takes it one step further than that, in that to lose the anthropocentric vision altogether, right? That we are not the center of the universe. And if we start to look at ourselves as one piece of a grander, like, community of creation, I think is the words that she uses,
Yeah.
something like that. Um, then
I
then
think,
what does the world look like, right?
yeah, I mean she's saying that like we're one piece of a creation that God's like independently interested in.
Yeah.
Like God wants relationship with all of us, and we can be on equal footing with the rest of creation. And that language of stewards puts us in between God and the world.
Yeah.
And so like it's a step in the right direction if you're moving away from the like dominion language, but
Right.
she's making the claim that it's not far enough.
Well, right, that like it's that somehow we are the intermediaries between God and creation, when we know perfectly well that God can be creative and move and create in the world, absence of human presence, and sometimes better in the absence of human presence.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about like how, this interconnected thing, right? Like we need creation in order to survive. Like we need plants and animals to order to survive, and plants and animals need each other in order to survive. Um, and I start to wonder if like we're actually the only species that we need creation to survive, but I don't know if the rest of creation needs us.
Yeah, that's good
Like, would
question.
the rest of the world just be better off Um,
Part of me wonders if we've put ourselves in a place where, like, um, where it does because of how much creation we've destroyed. And I'm sure that creation would find a way to, and will find a way to continue when we're gone. Um, but um, but you see, like, if bugs or creatures like move around the world because of the way that we move around the world, I wonder how necessary that is to, like, ecosystems that we've kind of really screwed up.
oh, we've totally screwed up ecosystems by introducing things that aren't supposed to be there.
I don't know. That is not my area of expertise in any way.
No. Yeah, no. And so like Johnson is good at like she is coming from like a theological perspective, and she's really good at owning that, but does talk about some like pretty scientific things in the book. John's read it more recently than I have. I read it in seminary and then loaned, because I thought it was so good, I loaned my book to someone. I don't remember who I loaned it to, but they haven't given it back to me. So if
you're listening to this podcast,
yes,
please return AJ's copy of Ask the Beasts.
please, yes. Please reach out to me and be like, oh, that was me. Sorry. I'll be like, cool.
That's really why you created a podcast, was to just get your books back.
Right. Yeah. I really don't loan out that many books. But I thought this one was really good. But I think Elizabeth Johnson is just a good theologian and a good writer. So this book, actually, she started writing this book right after like a huge scandal happened. And I was wrong when I was telling you about this, John. It was not the book She Who Is. No one said anything about that. It was Quest for the Living God. So her book, Quest for the Living God, which is basically an understanding of systematic theology. It was 4 years after the book was published. The Catholic Conference of Bishops came at her about it and like put her on trial. Well, basically they just like, they didn't. So her big thing is that she was upset about is they never once tried to have a conversation with her or to talk about the theology or anything. They just were like, we disagree with you for all of these reasons and want to make it very clear that this is against Catholic teaching. And she, tried to be like, hey, like, can we have a conversation about this? And like wrote them a like 38-page explanation of talking about it, and even hired she hired lawyers and stuff, canon lawyers. I don't totally know what that means. Apparently there are like specific kinds of like church lawyers. Anyways,
I mean, that's probably a good thing to have, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And was just really disappointed that like they reissued another letter to her, and she felt like they didn't even read her paper that she had sent. She even asked to speak, and no one ever wanted to speak to her about it, would never engage her in any kind of conversation. They just wanted to make it very clear that they were upset at her and that they were against her book 4 years after it was published.
So you're saying the church likes to make a big deal about things, but not actually do anything about it?
And they didn't. So they didn't punish her. Nothing happened, right? Like the book didn't get taken off the market. She doesn't have to stop teaching. Nothing happened to her. Actually, the only thing that happened to her happened to be a good thing. Because of this scandal, there was a huge surge in book sales. Everyone was like, oh my gosh, what is this thing that this woman wrote that was so scandalous that the Catholic Church is going after a nun?
What was the topic of the book? Do you know? Have you read it?
Yeah, it's my office, so I don't have it here.
It's not one that Living God.
So it's systematic theology, right? And so it's talking about, talks about God, talks about Jesus, talks about the Holy Spirit, talks about salvation. The thing that she did is, and again, there's actually nothing in this book that was like new, or that she hadn't written in her other books. Like there was a lot of things that she took from She Who Is, and put in there. So talking about language about God, that like, newsflash, God doesn't have a penis, right? And so like it's They had issues with that. They had, I don't remember what all of the other issues. Part of it was also about like, part of it does kind of say about how like maybe, you know, humans aren't the center of the universe. They didn't like that. There was a bunch of things. The problem that I understand it that they had is that the book was being used to teach Catholic college students, and they wanted to make it very clear that they didn't think that this was Catholic theology and should not be used to teach Catholic college students who might think that this is Catholic theology. I don't know. She went on a thing and she's like, it's not contrary to Catholic theology at all, actually. And I just, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's helpful to have like a wide view of theology when you're, no matter what, like what seminary you're going to get other perspectives and find a way to like bring that back to like your Lutheran understanding. Or
well, that was it. They weren't seminary students. They were like undergraduate college students.
Oh,
and that was too far.
I guess that's too much.
It is.
They're not old enough to think outside the box.
Yeah, they're not smart enough to be able to have multiple expressions of anything, right? So anyways, like, so she didn't have to like stop using it, right? And like she works at a Jesuit university. They just wanted to make it very clear that they disagreed with her. Which, all right. I thought it was great. Part of it too is so she brought in other like, so she looks at like a typical like old school white male systematic theology book would be like any like Paul Tillich, right? Like that sort of perspective. And so the whole thing
Jürgen Moltmann.
Yes. Moltmann. Yes. So taking out like, so putting things in different perspectives, right? So to talk about those same like very basic concepts, but to come at it from a feminist theological perspective, a mujerista theological perspective, a liberation theology perspective. So that's what she did in that book, is she put those things in, and apparently that was wrong. I thought it was great. I honestly like, so this is part of the thing with redefining this dominion thing and this anthropocentric way of looking at the world is, you know, I think we also have evolved, and maybe it's about time that like it's okay to look at the world differently than what a white man said 200, 400, 500 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's okay to expand or to completely change perspectives. Like we're not tied to this just because it's old.
I think some people just get it in their heads that like the church would fall apart if you know, we let other perspectives in for some reason.
And it sometimes does, and I think that's okay. Right? Like systems can die, and like we're resurrection people.
Yeah.
Like we believe that there's life after death. And so sometimes you have to let it die.
Well, and also I think when it comes to like the church, and this definitely probably is applicable to a lot of listeners of, you know, the church as it exists is not the church I think the younger generations are interested in, and that it's going to have to change and adapt if it's going to be a place where people are going to be in 50 years. And it will. Like the church is not going to die. So the church is dying. The church is not going to die.
No, I hate it when people say that.
It's shedding.
And I just said it.
It's pruning, but it's not going to die.
Yeah.
That's your good, our good language having to do with, you know, taking care of the world and that kind of stuff. Anyways, so the thing with Job that I find really interesting, because if you look at it in this like direct perspective of Job, right, that like God just apparently appears to just like not be interested in responding to Job in a certain way. But I think a good perspective is that like our relationship with God is more nuanced than like God being a genie that grants wishes, right? Like if you're good, then you get a reward. And if you're bad, then you get a punishment. And I still think that there's a lot of theology out there that looks like that.
Yeah. definitely.
But I think the Book of Job can help us kind of like get beyond that a little bit. That like I think in when the Lord responds to Job, right, you get this sort of mindset of like, listen, this isn't how it works.
Well, and like God's kind of in a way telling Job that like there's chaos in the world,
Yeah.
right? Like, and good things can come from chaos, and bad things do come from chaos. But that doesn't necessarily make it evil.
Yeah. I don't remember if I've talked about this on any of the podcasts yet about the difference between like natural evil and moral evil.
Not that I remember, but
So, Daniel Migliore, who's another systematic theologian kind of guy, a newer one than the old dead guys, talks about the difference between natural evil and moral evils in the world. And that natural evil is not really evil, but it's just, it's the circle of life stuff. Like suffering and chaos happens in the world. And that's just a part of the world, right? Like even just think about the cycle, right? Like if a cat eats a bird, right? Like from the perspective of the bird, right? That's horrifying. But from the perspective of the cat, right? It's dinner, right? It's just a cycle, right? And so like when natural disasters, things like that, but these are natural evils. Though that was probably a bad example because
we're adding to that.
yeah, natural disasters might actually fall under the category of moral evils these days. And so moral evils are the suffering in the world that is caused at the hands of humans when we hurt each other, or as in the grand scheme of it, right? Like so, like we talked about with the natural disasters, right? That like how we are affecting the atmosphere and the earth itself is actually causing these things. So this is the suffering in the world that we cause, and so there's that difference, right? And so I think God's getting at that a little bit. Like, listen, there are just things that are.
Yeah, watch it exist.
Watch it exist. Little Lenny Pepperbottom.
Yeah, that's a good Google rabbit hole for anyone who wants to go on a nature walk.
Because nature's neat. It's an aspen, by the way. It is.
I don't know how to come back from that.
I mean, we're still talking about nature.
It's true.
But that's all people are going to remember. They're not going to go read Ask the Beast. They're going to go on YouTube and be like, Lenny Pepperbottom.
Yep. I think you should name the episode "I've Got Tree Poop on My Tootsies."
I've got tree poop on my tootsies.
I had to do we had a 10-person group presentation on this book, which is way too many people.
Group?
Yep.
No.
It was one of the worst experiences of my life.
Why were you one of the people that got stuck doing all the work? Because 10 people aren't doing work.
No, I just had to be one of the people that was like herding the cats.
Right.
Because I know technology and sending out a doodle poll is so hard. But I got to present on chapter 10 and try to wrap up. Each person presented on a chapter. Okay. And I had to try to tie the whole disjointed thing together in 3 minutes is all I had.
Oh my. So
we had 45 minutes to present on the book.
So tie it together for us.
Yeah, you caught me off guard. I don't have the right notes up. No,
way to go, John. Way to go. So I actually had to read the book for 2 different classes, for my feminist theology class and for my eco theology classes.
I guess like if we're kind of thinking about like how Johnson kind of sums things up, her ultimate question at the end is like, are we willing to engage in conversation with the earth or not? Like that's ultimately where she comes to a close.
Drops it right there in your lap. Like, are you willing to?
Yeah. Like, are we gonna like have compassionate care for other species, or are we just gonna let plants and animals go extinct? Like, we like in order to live in tune with God's abundant love, like uh, we have to do that so that all may have life. Because like creation is all of creation is our kin.
Mm-hmm.
And so like we have to like look beyond what we're doing now. Like there's more to this world than we're willing to look at.
Yeah. And, just that idea of like we start looking at the world differently.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think about this a lot. I think I might preach about it a little too much about how we're not the decision makers here, right? Like we're just a piece of a larger scale. Um, that who are we to put words in God's mouth? Who are we to decide what and who and how God loves? Because I think it can come down to that same thing with almost every theological issue, right? Like when it comes to the creation, when it comes to LGBT persons of color, when it comes to I don't know, think of some more examples. I think anything that we decide, or even just Christians versus other people, like who are we to decide that for God? Who are we to like put limits on God?
Yeah, we can only we can only use our human understanding to try to describe something that's infinite, and like it's not possible. Like,
Well, which is also why, she's a big advocate, which is very rare, I think, in the Roman Catholic Church, about using other imagery for God. That it's not just, it doesn't have to be just male imagery and male
it's not
language.
just Sky Daddy. There are other
Daddy.
there are other even in the Bible there are other like analogies for God.
Yeah.
We just ignore them and are told not to talk about them in seminary.
I wasn't told that.
Oops. I guess that's just Wartburg.
Oh, ours is like the exact opposite. Like I had professors that would correct you if you kept calling God a he.
Yeah, we were pretty much told that like you have to use father language when you're like like someone got called out in chapel once for like using non-father language in the benediction. Um,
Oh, that's not okay at all. Nor is that a faithful understanding of Lutheran theology.
no, I would agree.
Wow.
So
Yeah, no, we were taught the
um,
exact opposite. And also, like, I just want to be clear, like, I think sometimes people think that, like, oh, you can't sit, when you go to congregations, then people don't understand that stuff. I'm like, well, I think you'd be quite surprised. The
yeah,
conversation.
and like you can explain it to people, like you can have conversations, like it's your congregation's not a monolith that's unwilling to change. Like you can have conversations with individual people, and
I
like
think the first time I stood in the pulpit and said, God is not a man, I had 5 different people talk to me either later that day or later that week that just said, thank you. I've been waiting for someone to say that.
yeah,
Like it's
well,
okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Anyways. So the word ecological actually comes from the Greek word oikos, which means house or household, home or household. So just to think about that as a sort of, even just in that understanding of that word, when we think about it, this is our home. Right.
Yeah.
And it's not just our home though. And I think sometimes that like we forget that too, right? Of that like very human centered perspective, like this is our home. You know what? This is also everyone else's home and we're ruining it for them.
Yeah. It's the same thing we do with the word neighbor, right? We think about the people that literally live in the house next to us, right? Like that's not what Jesus was saying.
Jesus said we had to love our neighbor. So like when does that, like who does that actually include? I don't know the origins of the word neighbor. Sometimes that's fun though, if you can parse some of those things out and be like, this is why this is more inclusive, but also understanding again. So this ecological, this oikos, our house, our home, everybody is a neighbor in our home. Everybody's home is here.
We're all part of that family of God.
Yeah. But again, not just the humans. So I think
Mhm.
that'll be like the challenge that I want to leave our listeners with this week, of understanding that, like, start to think about the world if humans are not at the center. What does it look like? Go take a look at Job 12. Go take a look at Job 38 and see what, you know, what that nuanced perspective of God's relationship with the entire creation actually is. Any final thoughts? You're just gonna nod your head?
I'm just gonna nod my head because you said the things that those are great questions.
Good. Leave them with the challenge. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, John. I appreciate you coming, and I rescheduled this on John like 4 times, so I appreciate your flexibility and your friendship, all those
The
things.
flexibility of being an intern.
Yes.
It's all about.
Anyways, well, everybody, that's it for us this week. Look for us next Tuesday on Shit They Don't Tell You on Sunday. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Shit They Don't Tell You on Sunday. Listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, lots of other places. And you can always watch the magic on YouTube if you'd like. So anyways, follow us and subscribe, and send your friends and family that you think might want to have some of these fun conversations to come and check it out. All right. Take care, everyone.